Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining today's conference, Operationalizing the Secure Beef Supply Plan, a State's Perspective. Please note that all participant lines will be muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We will provide you with instructions on how to ask a verbal question at that time. You are welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, and these will be addressed during Q&A. To submit a written question, use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. If you require technical assistance, send a note to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the call over to Liz Fernandez. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd also like to welcome you and thank you for joining us today for what I believe will be an interesting webinar. We have two speakers today. Our first speaker is David Hogg. David currently serves as the Emergency Management Coordinator for the Kansas Department of Agriculture. As Emergency Management Coordinator, David oversees the agency's preparedness and response efforts, including serving as the state lead for ESF 11 and Kansas Response Plan Food and Agricultural Incident Annex. David also oversees the development, play, and after-action process of the annual Kansas Department of Agricultural Foreign Animal Disease exercise. David has a diverse background, including experience in farming, ranching, nonprofit and volunteer management, emergency planning and response, and television severe weather coverage. Our second speaker is Dr. Brandon Depenbusch, who graduated from Kansas State University in 2009 with a Doctor of Philosophy in Animal Sciences and management experience at the KSU Beef Cattle Ranch Center. Following his completion of doctoral studies, Brandon joined the team at Innovative Livestock Services in Great Bend, Kansas. As the Vice President of Cattle Operations for Innovative Livestock Services, Dr. Depenbusch oversees 8 cattle feed yards in both Kansas and Nebraska, trucking and fuel distribution companies, and an alfalfa pellet mill. He also spearheads research, development, and metrics analysis for the company. Fueled by a passion to continuously improve our ability to honor our natural resources while feeding the world, Brandon dedicates his days to ensuring that his team focuses on quality animal welfare, effective food safety measures, and an efficient use of resources. And with that, I will pass the webinar over to David Hogg.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Liz, for turning that over to me. Again, thank you for joining us and for allowing us to kind of talk a little bit about what we're trying to do here in Kansas with the Secure Beef Supply Project. When we talk about secure beef, one thing that I want to make very clear at the beginning is we've kind of branded this Kansas Secure Beef, but there's no difference between this and the national level Secure Beef Supply Plan. We just call it Kansas and have developed some graphics just for our own producers here in the state to help kind of connect that, you know, as a state agency, we're working toward, working with them to develop these plans. When we look at the goals of kind of what we're trying to do with SBS plans here in Kansas, obviously supporting economic viability is really key. Providing guidance to reduce disease spread, I think, probably is something that can be easily overlooked. When we talk to producers, when we work with them, when we talk about secure beef, sometimes there's a quick jump to, I'm going to do this plan so that I can move animals during a disease outbreak. What we've found is that when we can talk to producers, talk to operations, and they really get in their mind that first and foremost, this plan is about reducing disease spread, that this plan is about keeping my herd and my operations safe, and that that's the #1 goal, we definitely see a lot more buy-in. And then that down the road, then movement becomes important, but that we're really focusing on keeping our animals safe. And so we definitely see, I think, more engagement and more active engagement among producers. With that being said, obviously, a key component here of secure beef supply is that ability to safely, with as low risk as possible, continue business and potentially be able to move animals during a foot-and-mouth disease outbreak. When we talk about our risk in Kansas and why we put so much effort and time into this, we really look at the idea of that being in the middle of the country, being in the middle of, the really most dense cattle raising and feeding operations in the nation, really makes our risk higher than a lot of other states, very similar to Nebraska, very similar to that Texas Panhandle region. But because we import livestock, because we are getting livestock into Kansas from every other state, from Canada, from Mexico on a regular basis, we know that if foot and mouth is happening anywhere, it's probably going to happen here, or it's already here and we just haven't found it yet. Similarly, even for that livestock that isn't coming here to be fed or to be slaughtered, just the amount of movement that happens across Kansas we know is significant. We've been very well reminded of that recently with our swine movements related to African swine fever, and seeing just how much things are on the road across Kansas on a daily basis. And then finally, again, just the concentration that we have, especially in the western half of the state, in our livestock operations, in those feedlots and in dairies. We know that if we get a disease outbreak, if we get foot and mouth into an operation like that, it's going to cause tremendous problems. And so we want to be as proactive as we can in Kansas, looking at the entire response plan. So with that, secure beef has really become an integral part of what we're doing in Kansas. In 2017, Kansas was already working on a project with our feeding industry to develop guidelines for biosecurity. We were utilizing a guide that was actually developed by Texas cattle feeders, kind of looking at day-to-day biosecurity. And then about that time is when the secure beef supply guidance was released as well. So what we were able to do with that is kind of take what Texas cattle feeders had done, make it more Kansasified, for lack of a better term, and then insert into that the secure beef guidance as well. As we were doing that, as we were working on that project, we were actually approached by Brandon from ILS asking for assistance. And we kind of what he brought to our attention, and then we very much respected and appreciated, was just the idea that this is a lot. With what feedlots are doing on a day-to-day basis, they have their daily concerns. To ask them to kind of put this on top of that was going to be a challenge. And so he came to us asking just for assistance to develop a secure beef plan for their operation. What we then were able to do here in Kansas was turn around. We hired 3 interns from the university here in Manhattan, and really started to look at what does it take? What does it actually take to develop a plan? We had 2 interns that we really focused solely on secure beef. We had one that focused on secure milk, but all 3 were really integral in kind of putting this project together for us here in Kansas, and spend the entire summer really working with ILS to develop these plans for all of their individual yards. During the summer, the end of 2017, like I said, we worked with ILS. The nice thing about working with them is, number one, again, they really got it that the protection of their herd, the protection of their animals, was the biggest priority. Movement is important, but protecting those animals has really got to be paramount. So, worked with ILS, we worked with the Forget Me Not Farms in Cimarron, that's a dairy, looking at secure milk, but then also understanding that even for a dairy, for them to move animals, they're going to have to fall under the same guidance of a secure beef supply plan. So then since the summer of 2017, we've continued to utilize interns. We've have a great partnership with Kansas State University, bringing interns in. We train them on how to write a plan. They spend a good 2 weeks doing nothing but research, learning the ins and outs of what the plan looks like, how to develop one, how to write one. And then we've opened that up for livestock operations around the state. They can request assistance from our office to write a plan. They can come to us directly. We've also added an option that now anytime an operation goes through a license renewal process, they can simply click a box that says, I would like to learn more information about secure beef supply planning, and then we reach back out to them. That's been very successful in just beginning a lot of conversations, honestly. By December of 2018, or by fall of 2018, we had discovered that this was becoming a large enough project that just utilizing interns wasn't going to be sufficient enough, and so we hired a full-time animal health planner that she started in December. She's now kind of taken over this project as far as really managing the actual plan writing, working with individual producers, individual operations to begin this process and then to work through that. But with that being said, really as we have gone out and spoken at any number of events around the state, whether in the Division of Animal Health here at KDA, whether in emergency management, with marketing, basically anywhere we go, secure beef is on our agenda. Sometimes it's the main purpose of a talk, sometimes it's the main purpose of an outreach event, and sometimes it's just sort of an ancillary topic. But everywhere we go, everything we do, this is something that comes up, and so part of our goal is to make secure beef really just a part of the language, a part of the culture here in Kansas in our industry. We've worked very closely with Kansas Livestock Association. We've worked with Kansas Farm Bureau. We've worked with K-State Research and Extension, and a number of other partners really to get the word out as much as we can that these are important, they're doable, they're realistic, and that we're here to help, that we're not going to just dump a load of information into a producer's lap, but we're there to kind of walk them through the process and assist them in developing their individualized plan. So to date, kind of where we're at around the state, secure beef specifically, we've completed 30 plans for feedlots around the state. We've got a number of others that are kind of in queue or being worked on at the moment. What that works out to is almost 1.5 million head of cattle. So when you look at the actual average size of a feedlot, is we're getting some very, very large operations that have bought into this and that are working with us to develop these plans. One thing that I mentioned earlier is, we really take this very seriously in Kansas. We have a rather robust plan for dealing with or responding to a foot and mouth disease outbreak. One thing that we have is in our plan is that our entire agency will kind of go into a response mode anytime there's a confirmation of foot and mouth anywhere in North America. And our agency has exercised this for a number of years. In the last couple of years, the secure beef supply plans have really become an integral part of our strategy, both for preparedness, for mitigation, with the idea that having these plans, we're going to limit the overall disease spread, but then also obviously for continuity of business, of how do we keep business moving, how do we keep the industry going during a disease outbreak like this. And so, as I mentioned, KDA does an annual foreign animal disease exercise every December. We've done, I think, 7 of the last 9 years we've held one of these multi-day functional exercises. And so in 2017, for the first time, we actually wrote the existence of plans into the exercise. And we had a number of different facilities, including ILS, that participated to practice their plan, to look at what works, what doesn't, how can this plan be made better, how can we, what can we do to streamline it, what do they need to be prepared for during a disease outbreak to activate their plan, to get it stood up as quickly as possible. And then this year, in 2018, we were able to, number one, do the same things. We had additional facilities that participated for the first time. And then this year also, for the first time, we started to really push into the permitting process. How do we move product during a disease outbreak in a way that's safe and utilize those plans, whether it's secure beef, secure milk, secure pork, but really look at, what has to happen for, our state, for our agency, and then for other states to feel comfortable that, yes, this is a low-risk movement. Yes, we feel good about allowing for that movement during an outbreak. Now where we're at right now as an agency is continuing to work with producers, continue to do outreach and education. Like I said, our goal is really to make this a part of the overall landscape in Kansas. Continuing to that is coordinating with packers and retailers, kind of helping them to understand what is secure beef, why is it important, why, how could a secure beef supply plan allow them to continue their regular business during a disease outbreak, to the as much as possible. We've also really begun discussions about regionalization of plans. I'll have a slide in more detail on that in a moment, but talking with our neighbors, talking with our other states around us, both on a state-to-state level, but also on that producer-to-producer level and a packer-to-packer or retailer-to-retailer level, making sure that what we're doing in Kansas works with other states around us and vice versa, that we're kind of speaking the same language. To this point, we've worked almost exclusively with feedlot operations. We really want to start expanding that to look at cow-calf, to look at stocker operations, really look at the entire sector of the beef industry. Obviously, secure beef is challenging. One of the reasons because the beef industry is not as integrated as those other industries are. And so we want to begin to work with the other parts of our industry in our state to begin to develop those plans. We're committed to continuing to provide assistance in developing, validating, and exercising plans. I mentioned that we recently hired our full-time planner. Beyond that, we're still utilizing interns. We have 2 new interns that just started here a couple weeks ago for the spring semester. We're going to continue to do that for the foreseeable future because we see that as a valuable tool in getting these plans written and really, again, working with those producers who may think, if I have to do this myself, it's probably never going to get done. But if someone can come alongside and work with me, then I'm willing to really engage in this process. We have developed a 10-year goal, and this may be overly ambitious. It may not be ambitious enough. But we have a 10-year goal that says that in a 10-year time frame, 90% of the total number of livestock in our state, we want to be covered by one of these plans. That doesn't mean 90% of operations, but 90% of the total livestock. So like I mentioned, with plans we've written so far, we've got a little under 1.5 million head of cattle covered. Obviously, again, we started with some of the larger feedlots in the state, but we feel like as we go along, this is where we want to be, and to have that out there that this is a statewide thing, I think is important. Some of the challenges we've encountered so far, I think obviously the biggest is just industry and producer buy-in. It's helping people understand, like I said before, that these plans are feasible, they're doable. We can, create solutions for you, but also helping them understand just that this is a threat. Sometimes we talk to people, and because it's been so long since we've had foot and mouth in North America, it's like, why do I want to spend time on this? Why do I want to spend energy on this? So it's really convincing them, helping them to think through, how would your day-to-day operation look differently in a disease outbreak? And if you don't have a plan for that, are you going to be able to survive? Are you going to be able to adapt in a way that you stay in business, honestly? And so that's really, I think, been the largest challenge. Beyond that, unique feedlot design. We can't just have a blanket template for secure beef because every feedlot is different. They're all designed differently. They all have their unique challenges. And so, again, this is why it's so important to have people dedicated to working on these plans, is because they can look at feedlots, look at maps, go and tour operations and get an idea for, here's how we can draw that line of separation. I know Brandon will talk about that more in just a minute. The plan validation and auditing piece, I think, is still a challenge that we haven't quite figured out yet, but understanding how do we make sure that a plan is up to date, has been exercised, employees have been trained, and then across state lines, knowing that a big chunk of the cattle that come into Kansas come from Oklahoma, come from Texas, come from Colorado, come from other states. And so ensuring that what we say is a validated secure beef supply plan is recognized by another state and vice versa. That what another state is saying, yep, they're good to go, well, do we all agree on what that means and what that looks like? Again, the employee training piece, obviously there's a lot of turnover in the cattle industry. There's a lot of turnover in the feeding industry. And so making sure that employees are kept up to date, kept up to speed, but also what, kind of deciding what level of training they need to have is something that I think on some level each individual operation kind of has to cross that bridge on their own, while at the same time we give them a baseline to say these are things that they need to know. Plan upkeep, again, a plan is only as good as your ability to actually implement it, and so helping these operations work through, tabletop exercises, functional exercises. Again, since we do this annual large-scale functional exercise, inviting people to play along with us so that they can, get their employees to actually do something and then validate it, or to go back to the drawing board and say, yeah, this looked good on paper, didn't really work in real life, and so the ability to update that and change it. Plan development during an outbreak, I think is something that we've never really crossed that bridge yet, but for a facility that doesn't have a secure beef supply plan, how quickly can they develop one if there's an outbreak? And if that's developed during an outbreak, how quickly would it be before we feel comfortable allowing for movement out of that facility? And so, again, I think that's a challenge looking forward. And then finally, the issue of livestock markets. Is there a way to sort of modify the secure beef template to work for a livestock market to where they can begin to operate again during and after a disease outbreak? I mentioned regional cooperation. We hosted a meeting back in August of 2018 in Kansas City with the 6 states there listed: Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas, and then with industry represented as well. So just kind of talk about, where does industry see this going? What is the idea? How do they see this as a valuable tool for them? And so we've continued that conversation to a certain level. I'll be honest, African swine fever has kind of pushed this regional conversation to the background a little bit, but we're continuing to engage regularly with our industry partners, again, to help them understand why we're doing this, but also to work with them to try to determine what are the opportunities there that we can work together to make secure beef really a standard across the industry. And so, again, this is a conversation that's going to continue on in the future, and then one that we see as really vital to secure beef continuing across the industry as a whole. Finally, the last kind of big thing that we're working on right now is we have a partnership with Kansas State University to offer a 1 credit hour class this semester. Myself and one of our other KDA employees are kind of leading this effort, but we have a class of a little over 20 students that are taking it this semester. They're learning from a number of different people about disease response, about how these plans have been developed, what they look like, and then as part of the class, each one of them will develop a plan themselves for an operation that they're going to be paired with. And so, again, our goal is to create an entire sort of generation of folks, if you will, that believe in this, that understand this, that know biosecurity, and that want to take this out into the real world and into industry. If you have more questions later, I know we're going to have some time for questions at the end, but Emily Boris is our new planner. Like I said, she was hired back in December. She's, like I said, kind of leading up this effort now for KDA as far as the actual nuts and bolts of writing plans. I'm happy to answer any questions about where we've been and how this secure beef supply plan fits into our larger overall response plan and strategy here at KDA. But with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Liz to hand to Brandon. So thank you.
That was great, David. Thanks so much. That was a great overview. And now we're going to go ahead and hand it over to Brandon for his part of the webinar.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Liz, for that incredible introduction. As you was reading that, I'm trying to think who you was talking about, but I guess that was about me, so I appreciate that. Thank you. You know, David done an awesome job of giving us a great overview of secure beef from the vantage point of the state of Kansas. And I guess what I'm tasked with here is just maybe to bring it down a little bit to the producer level and give you guys, everybody on the call, just my perspective from a producer level. But to start off with that, I think it's important that we I give you an overview of our company a little bit because I think it plays into how we got to where we are. Innovative Livestock Services, or ILS, is a diversified agriculture company. The core of our business is feeding cattle. So we have 8 feed yards in the central part of Kansas and also in the central part of Nebraska. Now, we have several other support companies that come along and support that, and we farm a fairly significant amount of ground as well. But one of the key parts to our company, the key foundation to our company, is we're extremely focused on risk management. So our crop production, the purchase of our feeder cattle, our fat cattle, our corn prices, all of that is we're just very strictly managed on from a risk management standpoint. Some people would say we're too conservative, but I think it's a good approach for us. But that mindset really kind of helped boil over into this whole idea of disease preparedness. In our minds, at least in my mind, I see this as a form of risk management for our company. But with all that said, I mean, certainly we look at it from a risk management standpoint, but as a producer, we also have a responsibility for the care of our cattle, the cattle in our care, from protecting them from diseases. So the combination of both of them are really what got us to the table to be thinking about disease preparedness several years ago. To get to where we are today, it's a long process, and David's already kind of hit on some of these, but we started off many years ago trying to tackle this on our own. There's a Biosecurity and Business Continuity Plan, I think was the official name of it, produced by the Texas Panhandle Regional Planning Commission. And it was an excellent report. I mean, it was very thorough, but it was so thorough it was upwards of 200 and some pages. And that gets pretty daunting for, a regular producer to try to put into action. But that at least got us interested in thinking down this road. And then, again, as David talked about, Kansas come along and somewhat simplified that plan into that second bullet point there to bring it down into more of a biosecurity guide. But really, when we finally moved the needle is when we all become involved with the secure beef supply. And huge kudos to Danelle and her crew for really simplifying biosecurity and making it practical and giving great guidance to the industry. So as David said, we certainly in Kansas, we have it kind of labeled as Kansas Secure Beef Supply Plan. All what that is just a label. It's really the National Secure Beef Supply Plan that Danelle and her crew have put together. So it took us a long way to get from a 200-page document down to a very simplified version of biosecurity, but it was worth the process. Now, there's 3 things here that lessons learned. David talked about some lessons that they've learned, and some lessons that I've learned from my standpoint from a producer would be the first one is KISS, and I think probably everybody clearly understands what KISS means. But it is a daunting task to think about how we protect some of these feed yards from a disease such as foot and mouth when they sit on 160 plus acres of land with multiple entry points. There's just lots of challenges, so it's an absolute daunting task. One of the things that really needed to get through my mind is that we're not after perfection. I mean, that is the goal. It's a pursuit of perfection. But if I wait to implement a plan until we have a perfect plan, we may never implement a plan. So for us, it was we need to start somewhere, and then each year focus on continuous improvement and continue to find those gaps in that plan. Probably the main thing on that first bullet point there, and keep it simple, is certainly we got to keep it simple, but really what it does within our feed yards, it creates a preparedness mindset. And it's amazing once you finally get people over that. My second bullet point there is the mental threshold. Once they cross that mental threshold and they start thinking about disease preparedness, then you can have a real legitimate conversation. But I guarantee you we've seen it time and time again. David and I would go talk to a manager or whatever, and it can't be done. Guys, you have a beautiful theory, but it cannot be done because they're thinking about how in the world do we feed these cattle within 20 minutes of each other every day and not change the ration, and all the numerous other things that they are challenged with. But you keep asking them questions like David said, and you keep talking to them, and eventually they'll trip over this mental threshold. And then once they trip over that, then you can have a legitimate conversation about, okay, now how will we react when we're in war? Because we're right now in peacetime. Put yourself in the other side. And one thing that helps me get producers or my managers, our managers, to that is, listen, guys and gals, we have a fork in the road. We can either go left and when we have a disease outbreak and figure out a way how we're going to euthanize all these animals or deal with this collateral damage, or we can go right, which I choose to do, and let's try to be prepared, try to wall ourselves off, and try to keep the disease out. So that third and last bullet point there, and David hit on it very well, is even though we keep working that previous slide, and we work from a 200-page document down to the summary, down to the Secure Beef Supply Plan, even though we got it distilled down to a fairly simple guidance document, as a producer, like everybody on the call, will have a full-time job. So one more job added to our day, it just doesn't happen. So for us, for our company, nothing really happened until we became involved with Kent's Department of Ag and their interns and how that worked. And that was an absolute hit it out of the park solution for this, because we had 3 great interns that Kent's Department of Ag had. ILS, we actually had 1 intern ourselves, and their project was work on biosecurity. So the combination of all 4 of them really helped get us to the point where we had at least a starting point, not a perfect plan, but at least a starting point for our plans. You know, I want to go over some plans here, just some examples, but I don't want to bore everybody with details, but I just want to talk about maybe more of the specifics, the differences between yards. Here's more of a zoomed-in image, and, you know, the line of separation, the LOS, is obviously the key component to any biosecurity plan. How do we create a moat, as I've heard Danelle say 100 times, or a wall, or whatever mechanism you want to say? How do we create some kind of barrier, physical barrier from the outside world, which we will consider dirty, and the inside the world in the feed yard, which we'll consider clean? And you can see there's a red line that goes all the way around the operation. We have a star there, red star, where we have the cattle receiving. There's a little orange line there, 2 different places up on the top center where we allow vehicle entrances, where we will do disinfecting and that type of stuff. So I'm guessing most of everybody on the call has some experience with this type of plan. One interesting thing about this plan is you'll see right there in the middle of the building all those different, or the middle of the slide, all those different buildings. That's actually our feed preparation area. So this mill is situated in such a manner where the loader operates, where it loads the trucks, and the feed ingredients are stored. That's actually on the outside, or the dirty side. The feed truck that actually drives by the cattle is actually on the clean side, or the inside. So that's one unique scenario. We're able to do that to address the issue of feed mills. If I go to this next slide here, you will see this is probably one of our most efficient feed yards. You see it covers 160 plus acres. Right there in the middle, smack dab in the middle, that's where our feed mill is. And from a daily operational standpoint, that's pretty efficient. You know, we can just, any way we go from that feed mill, we can be right at a feed pen pretty quickly. But what's good for operational efficiency really kind of stinks when it comes to biosecurity planning, because now how in the world do we get all the feed ingredients across that line of separation by all those cattle into that feed mill? And this is probably the hardest one that, at least in our company, that we had to work with. And it made us think of some creative solutions. We have a silage pile for roughage source that would last us a pretty significant period of time, depending on season. We have a large amount of hay storage inside the facility that we could feed the cattle at least some hay and silage. Again, that's not a perfect ration. But if we think about when we enact this plan, we're not really after optimal performance at that point. We're really at that point, how do we protect our cattle from getting sick and getting this virus? So we've come up with a solution. How do we get corn across this line? And up there, kind of at the top right, above that kind of that square lagoon, that's what that lagoon is sticking up at the top there, We have plans that we will bring in corn trucks right there, so we'll keep the corn trucks, the delivery trucks on the outside of the line of separation. We will have some feed truck or semi-truck on the inside of the line of separation. Again, so they will never cross that line of separation. And then we'll just use an auger or a conveyor, a high-speed conveyor, to convey corn across that line. Now, you can imagine if you start that conversation off with the manager says, hey, I got a perfect solution for you. We're going to do this. That's how you're going to feed your cattle. If you don't get shot, you're at least going to get your eyes rolled at. And that's why it's so important that when you go through this process, you slow down and allow them to trip over that mental threshold to get to this point. Once they get to this point, they see it and they get it and they understand that it's not business as usual. And the focus isn't on operational efficiency, but really on disease preparedness. So that's one example. The last example that I have of feed yards is actually two separate feed yards we operate. We kind of operate them together as one. They're separated by a little over a mile of a county road. We've worked with the county emergency officer, the sheriff's department, and others to say, what if during a disease outbreak that we can basically wall off that whole area? We can do that because we're somewhat remote there. There's no neighbors that we interfere with. Well, we can really, now that county road that connects those two feed yards can now be part of just an extension of our feed yards. We can put up barricades and such, and we can move freely between those yards and not transmit disease. And why that's important, you may ask. The feed yard down to the south, we have just tremendous amount of grain storage in the form of high moisture corn. So we could pretty much operate that feed yard for a pretty significant period of time if we can use that corn at both places. So those are three examples. The first one where the feed mill is kind of up off to the side of the feed yard, which we're able to basically almost continue on as business as normal, but still respect that line of separation. The second example is we're at the feed yard right in the middle of the feed yard, which added a huge degree of difficulty. And then this one, just another creative solution, if you will. But as you can see, there's no one size fits all. Every facility is different. Every facility has its challenges. I talked about earlier about our continuous improvement plan. There's really three functions or three components to that. We're first of all focusing on annual training that we'll do internally. That's on the line of separation principle. Just train our people to understand what that means. Train them to understand during a disease outbreak that there's going to be one, maybe two inlets into the feed yard and everything else is closed off. We'll certainly cover just general biosecurity, entry and exit procedures, how to protect ourselves, and then really how do we help our employees protect their animals that they may have at home so they don't bring disease to us or take disease back to their place. I think another key component that we want to work on, we got to handle it delicately, but how do we train on our employees recognizing the signs and symptoms of foot and mouth disease? Speed is paramount in this. How quickly can you identify an animal to minimize the spread? So some of the lesions that would be between the toes would be very similar to what we'd see with foot and mouth disease. So how do we train them to recognize if you start seeing a bunch of animals that have this, something unusual, how do you bring it to their attention so we can catch it quickly? The second bullet point, major bullet point there would be, I have written there exercise plans every 3 years, third year. We're really in discussion, do we do that every 2 or 3 years? How do we balance that? We want to keep it fresh, but also we don't want to bore our team with it, so how do we exercise those plans? Exercise those plans we've done at different levels. The first year we've done it, we actually went out there with stakes and hammers and sledgehammers and nailed in stakes, blocked off entry points, hung up tape, locked gates, et cetera, went through employee entry and exit. That was a pretty tedious process. I don't know, to be honest, how much we learned from that exercise, that much. The second year, I liked the approach we did much better. The approach we took then is we gathered all the managers, system managers, department heads, and others in a room, and We talked about our biosecurity plan, went through it line by line to review it, what has changed, what hasn't, went out and physically looked at different locations at the facility and walked through the plan. We discussed some of the challenges that we would have during this period of time, and then probably the thing that's probably the most important is we assign responsibilities to specific people. Who's going to do what when we enact this plan? The other last component that we work into this exercise is we really test our internal communications, which is really outside disease preparedness. But should we have a disease outbreak, most likely our phones will be burning up, if you will. And how do we don't want to control that message, but make sure we get the correct message sent out so everybody clearly knows who's doing what and what's going on. So that's really been a very interesting thing that we've learned a lot from internally. That very last bullet point, David hit on it. And boy, oh howdy, I'm proud to live in Kansas, and I'm proud to be associated with David and the Kansas Department of Ag and what they do for the producers in the state of Kansas to put on these annual exercises they've been doing for many years. If you haven't participated in it, boy, oh howdy, I highly encourage you to go just sit and watch. I think you'll be amazed, like I was, the number of people running around and how realistic they treat it, and vice versa. When we, at our feed yards, participate at the same time they do, how more realistic that makes it for us. So those 3 points are really our focus on when I talked about continuous improvement, our annual training, exercise of plans, and then the participation in the KDA annual exercise. I'm really at the end of my slides, but I got one other point that I want to bring up that David hit on, but I really want to stress it. But when we focus on the future needs and challenges, that whole regional approach that David talked about earlier is really, really important. I mean, it makes no difference if one state does one thing, but everybody else doesn't do anything. I like to say none of us are safe until all of us are safe. So what that means is that Kansas can be the absolute most safe, or Nebraska or Oklahoma or Texas, doesn't matter. You name the state can be the most safe state. But if the neighboring states really don't take this seriously and have a cohesive plan put together, disease isn't going to respect some state boundary. So really we need, as I would encourage whoever's on the call, what influence they have, how do we bring this to a regional approach? Liz, I used up all the words that I know, so I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
And you guys have been great. This has been exactly what I was hoping this webinar would be like, and I think your concepts and your thoughts should be taken by everybody that's been on the webinar. So let's open it up to see if we have any questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we move to Q&A, please feel free to place yourself into the question queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At the time, please state your name and question. And just a reminder, to submit a written question, use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. And we do have a verbal question. All your lines are muted. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Robin Budgeon, and I'm listening in from Canada, and I loved your presentation. I work for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and one of the areas I'm involved in is permitting. So, David, my question is to you. My ears really perked up. So, first of all, kudos. Very impressive work and really inspiring. But my question is, you mentioned in one of your exercises that you were pushing the plans or the secure beef supply plans out to use in the permitting process, and I'm really curious as to how you made that work. Now, I don't expect it's something you can talk about, just sort of an overview. Did you require that they get submitted for approval? Did you have a panel approving them? How did it work, and the second part is, did it work effectively?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I'll be honest, I'll answer your second part first. We're still working on it, honestly. Permitting is a big piece that we understand, and it is an ongoing challenge that we have. With that being said, when we stand up our incident management team, we have an entire permitting branch looking at moving product. We're very aggressive in Kansas with we will institute in the event of a foot and mouth disease outbreak. We're going to institute a statewide stop movement order for all animals and animal products, and then kind of work our way backwards, if you will, in allowing for movements. And kind of what we have at this point is a policy that states that to move product, so if you're a dairy, to move milk or to move animals, you're going to have one of these plans in place. You're going to have to allow our permit branch to review it and to make sure that you're actually doing what you said you would be doing. And then after we kind of have both those check marks, then we start looking at, okay, let's issue this permit, let's work together and move that if it's within Kansas. Obviously, if it's moving to another state or coming into Kansas, we're going to have to work with that other state as well. But we're fairly adamant that we see secure beef, secure milk, secure pork as the way that we're going to allow movement, because that gives us the confidence to say that this is as low a risk as we can possibly feel good about if they're doing this biosecurity. So a lot more I can say about that, a lot more that, like I said, we're still working on. We know that the total volume of permits is going to be astronomical during an outbreak, especially multiple days and weeks into it. And so to say that we have it all figured out would very much be a lie, but that's kind of where we're starting from right now.
Well, that's a great starting point. Thank you very much.
Now, we do have a written question that came in. In the remote areas, do all the feedlots have their own truck washes, and are there enough?
I can take a stab at that.
Okay.
No, there's each feed yard would not have their own truck wash. Certainly, some of them do, and that's certainly a challenge. There's an opportunity there, I think, for somebody to maybe to set something up. I think the packers, at least the packers that we work with, are actively trying to figure out how to solve that part of the equation to build one close to a packing place where all the trucks will eventually get to. So the short answer is no. Long answer is it depends. We have some at some of our facilities, but to be honest, some of our facilities we don't. So how we work through that is going to be a challenge, but that's part of our plan, that they need to arrive clean. And there's some around in our region that we can direct them to get them clean too, but no. Short answer is no.
So another written question is, since Texas has many large feedlots, are you collaborating with Texas Animal Health Commission in the development of a regional secure beef supply plan?
In a word, yes. No, we have excellent relationships with our states in this region, and really, I would say it in a way that every state that we've visited with and talked to, we have good relationships with. So, but yes, we've worked and are currently working with Texas, with Oklahoma, with Colorado, with this entire region. To say that we're at a spot where we have a regional plan yet, we're not there yet, but we're much farther down the road with those conversations than we were, even just a year or two ago. So, no, we're definitely see the need for that in the future.
I have another question, another written question is, how quickly could the average feedlot provide a list of all provider sources? And are any sources solely from farms or most coming through markets?
Well, I guess I'll try to line my way through this one. That's good. That's going to take a long time. I mean, that is a challenge.
Yeah.
Lack of a traceability system in our industry makes it a pretty big challenge to be able to trace animals from segment to segment. It can be done. To how quickly? I mean, the good thing is there's not. Well, I don't know if it's a good thing. I mean, there could be thousands of animals arriving each day, so to be able to know where they're at, to give you a specific time how quickly that would be, it wouldn't be a very quick task. I mean, it would probably take several hours for our feed yards to figure out what trucks are en route and where they're coming from, and that's part of our communications plan to work with our our trucking company, our dispatcher, our cattle procurement team, our cattle buyers to get at that. How quickly can we ascertain what trucks are on the road when an outbreak happens and where are those trucks from? And then more importantly, what do we do if those trucks are on the road? Do we let them continue on to the destination? Do we turn around, have them turn around and send back? Or do we send them to a couple of our quarantine sites to just let the animals dead and make sure they don't show no signs and symptoms? So I would guess it takes several hours for most feed yards to really get a good handle on where all those animals were at.
Okay, do we have any other verbal questions in the queue?
At this time, there are no further questions.
Any other written questions people would like to submit? I have a lot of thanks for everybody from the California Department of Food and Agriculture. Oh, I have one more question. Here we go. I would like to know if each SBS plan goes via a review and approval process. And do you have any renewal requirements for those with an approved biosecurity plan?
Yes, so every plan that's written is approved by our office, by KDA, ultimately by the Kansas Animal Health Commissioner or his designee. I'll be honest, we're still working on figuring exactly out how to do the long-term auditing process. We know there will be some kind of probably yearly auditing that may just be a paper audit to ensure that employees are being trained, that there's been upkeep to the plan, if there have been any changes to the operation, anything like that that's being reflected. And then we also think that eventually there's going to be an issue of doing an on-site audit, because we really don't want to be in the business of doing an on-site audit during a disease outbreak. So there has to be some level of accountability and upkeep and the ability for these operations to kind of give us evidence that, hey, we're doing what we need to do, we're keeping this up, so that in the midst of an outbreak, they can just send, hey, here's what we're doing, maybe send a few pictures, here's our line of separation marked, here's what we're doing, here's our visitor log for the last 2 weeks, something like that, so that we can move this process along quickly, because we know if we're going to try to audit plans during an outbreak, that's not going to be possible. So, again, honestly, something we're still internally working on, but that's kind of where we're at the moment.
We do have another written question. Is rendering still the primary mode of carcass disposal, and have you incorporated dead animal disposal into your line of separation plan?
I can address how we handle our dead animals. The rendering, I guess I'll probably leave that to David, but just our normal mortalities that we would have in our feed yards, just general respiratory or a bloat or whatever the normal general mortality would be, is we have a plan at each one of our facilities and a location to compost those animals. Because most likely we're going to be in a stop movement, so the rendering truck won't be coming by to pick up those animals. But even if the rendering truck is available to come pick up those animals, I'm not too excited about having a rendering truck drive through our yard during an outbreak, potentially exposing our herd to those animals. So we have a plan to render just our normal mortalities, but the greater question of if we have to euthanize animals, that's maybe more better question for David.
Yeah, no, Brandon said that really well. So during an outbreak, rendering is going to fall under, at least in Kansas, will fall under our stop movement order. So that won't be an option during an outbreak. And so that is addressed in all these plans, that there has to be another plan for daily mortality. And so for the vast majority, that is composting. They find a site that's within that line of separation. We provide them additional materials to kind of learn about composting. That's also something that we build into our incident management team, that we have some experts from our Department of Health and Environment and also K-State University that are composting experts, so that we can help people know what they need to do to compost. But again, that's all for just daily mortality. If we have an incident where we have large-scale mortality because of a disease outbreak, well, that's a whole different issue. But during an outbreak, for the purpose of these plans, the majority will develop a plan to compost for that reason.
And we have one more written question. Are you developing a template that can be used in other states in the development of a consistent SBS plan?
You know, honestly, we use the same template that is developed by Iowa State that's on the National Secure Beef site. Honestly, our probably bigger concern as far as consistency is more with how these plans are approved, how they're audited, how they're kept up, and then how they would be actually utilized during a disease outbreak. So as far as the template, like I said, we utilize the same thing that's on the national website, but that regionalization, that permitted movement, how those plans are validated, that's really where we get into more of this issue of wanting to make sure that we're consistent across state lines, and what we've had these discussions regionally about how each state is going to cross those bridges before and during an outbreak.
Okay. Well, we're coming up on top of the hour. If we don't have any other questions, I don't know if we have any questions in the verbal queue.
There are no further verbal questions.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank David and Brandon. I think this webinar was great and very informational, and I appreciate your time taken out today to do this webinar. And thank you for everybody else for their participation today. We have another webinar scheduled on February 26th at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tony Pearson will discuss the global African swine fever situation, the critical biosecurity and hygiene concerns in prevention, mitigation, and control of the African swine fever virus. So I'll be sending out information about that webinar in the next day. And everybody, I hope you have a great day.
That concludes our conference. Thanks for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.